The internet sucks, says the guy currently talking to you through a video courtesy of the internet. What a great thing to say to age yourself, too. You certainly don't hear the whippersnappers of the younger generation saying they wish the internet never existed. They never lived without it. It would be like saying, hey, you know what sucks? Food. All of it. With the widespread adoption of the internet, the way people live their lives has changed forever. The benefits include some obvious ones: greater access to information, other people, or perhaps most important of all, weird memes posted by your uncle. How could we live without him? The internet has been so woven into many of our daily lives that it can feel like a rude awakening if we're ever without it. Ever had your internet go down for an extended period of time? You think, what am I supposed to do now? Look at the people I live with and interact with them? How did people live like this? I got it. I'll reset the router, but this time I'll leave it unplugged for 15 seconds instead of 10. Naturally, the internet has changed the gaming landscape as well. And yeah, games have kind of always been connected online in some way or another, but I'm talking about when the internet became more widespread, like late 90s, early 2000s. Not only did the internet change how current games are designed, but also how the community around older games operates. You know, the retro gaming community. When it comes to gaming before the internet, what jumps out to me is all the things we used to have that would make video games more fun that we no longer have because they were replaced by the internet. Strategy guides, magazines, manuals, friends. Oh wait, we can still have friends? Might want to make a note of that one. Point is, the internet is slowly replacing a lot of things associated with video games, and the fear is that this may eventually lead to video games themselves, at least physical copies, with the distribution of video games via digital downloads becoming more and more accepted. Although there is somewhat of an effort that's been made against that, and we all know how much retro gamers love their physical copies of games. I mean, just look at what some of these older games come with: a case, manual, some games are autographed. This one even came with a snack. Very considerate. But even though you can still buy physical copies of more modern games, the culture around how people buy them has changed. Now when you want to buy a game, you'll likely just go online, do some research to make sure it's something you'll like, and then have it delivered to your home. But back in the day, a common way to buy games was to go to the store and either pick out something a friend had or make a decision based off the artwork. But wait a second, how is that better? What if you end up with a bad game because the box art tricked you, Dark Rift, you dirty dog? Or on the flip side, you might have thought something like Mega Man 2 was trash if you didn't know better beforehand. Well, that's all true, but it's not like we didn't have any information at all. We did have magazines, word of mouth, and might have already played certain games at somebody's house. But even if you were going in blind, there was a certain magic to knowing you might be about to discover the next great game based on nothing but your own personal hunch. Nowadays, it generally takes a concerted effort to keep yourself totally blind to information on things. Do you have any idea what I've had to do to keep myself blind to new movies coming out? There I am, sitting there watching TV, and boom, on comes a commercial. But when you stumble across a video game nowadays that you know nothing about, unless it was just announced, you probably don't know anything about it for a reason, and good chance that reason is because it sucks. Not to say there aren't some exceptions, especially in the indie scene, but even the better indie games seem to be talked about all over the place. What can I say? Discovering a game that turns out to be great on your own is just special, and I suppose that there's a certain thrill of the unknown, even if the odds aren't in your favor, which is why when I go to brush my teeth every night to spice things up, I load up 3 toothbrushes, one with toothpaste, one with ketchup, and one with mustard. Then I just close my eyes, shuffle those brushes, pick one up, and let her rip. Now I understand why people love gambling so much. But like I said, when choosing which game we wanted back in the day, we had more resources than just going off the box art. Gaming magazines were certainly one of our go-tos, although screenshots aren't the same as having video footage, and these magazines tended to try to make everything sound great and hype it up. Seriously, those magazines could have me reading about the Game Boy version of Cool Spot, and I'd come away thinking, by golly, that sounds like a banger. There were at least reviews though, as biased as some of them might have been, but perhaps the biggest source of information we got was from word of mouth. And if you think choosing games based off cover art created mystery, learning about games by word of mouth was a doozy. Basically, everything needed to be treated like a rumor, and typically, the more credible somebody tried to be, the less credible they actually were. How many times did we have to hear some kids say they knew somebody who worked for Nintendo, Sega, or what have you, and because it was just a free-for-all of lies, it would often escalate. Well, my dad works for Sega, and he said Sonic the Hedgehog 4 is coming out for a new Sega console, to which another kid would say, oh yeah? Well, my mail carrier's dad works for Nintendo, and said Sonic the Hedgehog 4 is coming out this year, but for Super Nintendo, to which the first kid would respond, oh yeah? Well, my mail carrier's dad can beat up your mail carrier's dad. And then the recess bell would ring. Nothing could really be disproven either, unless it was about a game you already owned, and then you could still end up wasting your time trying to either prove or disprove it yourself. Nowadays, if somebody says the Nintendo Switch cartridges taste bad, you could just quickly look it up and see a bunch of people have already tasted them. Not that it wouldn't make you curious to try it out yourself anyways, I think they taste fine personally. Okay, but what about the design of the games themselves? Perhaps the biggest change to come with game consoles being able to go online would be online multiplayer. To be clear, I'm referring to more widespread adoption, around the time of the original Xbox. In theory, having multiplayer online is great, and in reality, it's great in a lot of ways too. You have multiplayer that you can play with everyone all in the same room, except now you can also play it online with each person being who knows where, removing the hassle of getting everybody all in the same place. Because let's face it, it can be hard to find somebody to get a local multiplayer session going. So what's the downside? Well, with the increased emphasis of playing online has come a shift in gaming culture. Specifically, things have gotten far more competitive. Being able to beat your friend's jerk cousin in Mario Kart 64 is one thing, but when you're now measuring yourself up against, I don't know, every person in existence who cares about the game, yeah, things can get serious. And sometimes when things get too serious, it takes the fun out of it. Not to mention, emphasis on online gameplay has naturally led to a de-emphasis of local multiplayer and even single-player modes. Heck, some games are nothing but online multiplayer. Anybody remember using bots in multiplayer? You don't really see those anymore. Yeah, bots aren't as realistic as human competition, but at least they can't blast distorted music through their microphone or quit halfway through the match. Although I would say that I got the last laugh on that front, as I used to be really good at Halo, and I would give my headset to my younger cousin so he could babble total nonsense into the mic while I played. Drove other players nuts, and I'd say his magnum opus was singing John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt during a match where I was particularly dominant. Thing is, playing with people you know and like all in the same room is just way more fun for a lot of people. And before the internet, that was the only choice, even if it could be a hassle. Then we have stuff like DLC, patches, and microtransactions. The kinds of terms that, when heard by some people, can cause involuntary physical reactions. Now, these are all things that could be good things when utilized properly, but not so much when abused, which, yeah, they've been abused, and it's seemingly only getting worse as time goes on and companies push the envelope of what they can get away with. But hey, they're pioneers. Back in the day, when a game was finished, that meant it was finished. Well, most of the time anyways. Now, as games have become increasingly larger in scope over the years, it makes sense that they would become more complicated and therefore more likely to need things like patches. But a lot of retro gamers don't necessarily want games to be enormous, so that's probably why the juice isn't worth the squeeze for many of us. I mean, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that retro gamers prefer games that came prior to the internet becoming mainstream, seeing as those are older games, and that's what retro gamers do. We like old games. But in a twist of irony, while we may not like the way the internet has influenced the design of newer games, it does allow us to interact with older games in a lot of beneficial ways. Plus, I don't think the retro gaming community would be anything close to what it is now without it. You probably wouldn't know who I am, and I wouldn't have gotten to read all your beautiful comments either. The internet has allowed us to research games as well as find games. Practically any game you can think of, you can look up gameplay footage and find for purchase online. May not be the price you'd prefer, but it's there. Some games in our collections we may have never found if our only option was looking in the wild, so for these reasons, I don't think retro gamers despise the internet, even if they do prefer what the gaming scene was like before. And I think a lot of it could very well have to do with being kids, seeing as most of us were kids before the internet became so widespread. Anybody care to admit life was more fun as a kid? I will. And speaking of enjoying life as a kid, I've always loved that the internet gives the younger generations greater access to learning about retro games, and therefore a greater chance of having these older games be a part of their childhoods like they were for us. Alright, but with that said, this leads me to this video's question, which is, what did you like most about gaming life both before and after the internet became a big thing? So, with that said, leave your comments down below, and I will see ya in the next video. Hi, do you have a few minutes to talk about how you're parenting your child? Oh, they hung up. Oh well, next on the list. Yeah, hi, do you have a few minutes to talk about how you're parenting your child? Yeah, so first question, what kind of video games have you got them playing? He's the Retro Bird.